Disney has spent decades turning strange, tragic, and sometimes disturbing stories into magical family films. But behind the songs, happy endings, and colorful animation, some of their most famous movies come from sources that are far darker than most people realize. Here are 5 Disney films with real, bizarre, or deeply unsettling origins. 1. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. When Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premiered in 1937, it changed animation forever. It became Disney's first princess film and introduced the version of Snow White most people know today. A kind young girl, a jealous queen, a poisoned apple, and true love's kiss. But the older version of the story is far less gentle. In the Brothers Grimm tale from 1812, Snow White is revived not by a romantic kiss, but by accident. The prince is carrying her glass coffin when it is jolted, causing the poisoned apple to dislodge from her throat. She wakes up, and the story moves quickly toward revenge. The evil queen is invited to Snow White's wedding without realizing whose wedding it is. And when she arrives, she is punished in one of the most brutal ways imaginable. She is forced to wear red-hot iron shoes and dance until she dies. So while Disney gave us romance and innocence, the original story ends in public torture. 2. Pocahontas. Of all Disney's films, Pocahontas may be one of the most controversial because, unlike many fairy tales, it draws from a real historical figure. The movie tells a romantic story about Pocahontas and Captain John Smith, set against conflict between English settlers and Native Americans. But the real story was far more tragic and far less romantic. The historical Pocahontas was likely born around 1595, and her real name was Matoka. Pocahontas was a nickname, often translated as something like playful or naughty child. She was very young when John Smith encountered her people, far too young for the love story Disney created. Later, she was captured by English settlers. During that period, she married John Rolfe, converted, and was renamed Rebecca. Their marriage became a political symbol, presented as proof of peace between two worlds. But her story does not end in freedom or fairy tale happiness. On a journey back toward Virginia, she became ill and died in England at only around 21 years old. Some later suspected poisoning, though that was never proven. Disney turned a painful colonial history into a love story. The real life behind it is much sadder. 3. Tangled. Rapunzel. Disney's Tangled gives us lanterns, comedy, adventure, and one of the studio's most charming modern romances. Rapunzel is stolen as a baby, locked away in a tower, and eventually escapes to discover who she truly is. But the older Rapunzel tale is much harsher. It begins with a desperate husband stealing a plant from a witch's garden because his pregnant wife craves it. When he is caught, the witch agrees to spare him on one condition. When the baby is born, she will take the child. And she does. Rapunzel is raised by the witch and locked in a tower as she grows older. Eventually, a prince hears her singing, finds her, and the two fall in love in secret. But when the witch discovers what is happening, she cuts off Rapunzel's hair and abandons her in the wilderness. Then comes the truly cruel part. The witch uses Rapunzel's severed hair to lure the prince to the tower. When he learns Rapunzel is gone, he throws himself down in despair. He survives, but thorns pierce his eyes, leaving him blind. For months he wanders helplessly until he finds Rapunzel again, and she restores his sight. That is a long way from floating lanterns and frying pan jokes. 4. Pinocchio. Disney's Pinocchio is remembered as a moral tale. A puppet who wants to become a real boy, guided by Jiminy Cricket, learning honesty, courage, and selflessness. The original version, however, was much more severe. In Carlo Collodi's story, Pinocchio is not simply mischievous. He is often selfish, rebellious, and deeply unpleasant. At one point, when the cricket tries to lecture him, Pinocchio kills him with a hammer. That alone tells you everything about the tone of the original. Throughout the story, Pinocchio is robbed, starved, humiliated, punished, and brutalized again and again. Collodi wrote him as a warning, a living example of what happens to disobedient children. In fact, the author originally wanted Pinocchio to die by hanging. Publishers were horrified, and only then was the story softened and expanded. Disney kept the heart of the story, but stripped away much of its cruelty. 5. Winnie the Pooh. At first glance, Winnie the Pooh seems like the least likely title on this list. It is warm, harmless, and full of comfort. But even Pooh has a more unusual background than many people know. The character of Winnie was inspired by a real bear connected to London Zoo, while Christopher Robin was based on a Millen's own son. That much is rooted in reality. But over time, another theory has followed the stories, one never confirmed by the author, yet constantly discussed. Many people believe the characters can be read as psychological profiles. Pooh has been interpreted as inattentive and impulsive, Piglet as anxious, Tigger as hyperactive, Rabbit as obsessive, Eeyore as depressed, Owl as dyslexic, and Conga as overly controlling. Some even speculate that Christopher Robin imagined them all as reflections of his own mental state. Again, this was never confirmed. But the theory has endured, because once you hear it, it is difficult not to notice those traits in the characters. That is what makes Disney so fascinating. These films feel magical because they transform stories that were once tragic, violent, strange, or painfully real into something hopeful and timeless. Behind every princess, puppet, or honey-loving bear, there may be an older story one that is darker, rawer, and far less innocent than the version we grew up with. And sometimes, that hidden version is even more interesting than the movie itself.